Do I miss non-carnivore foods? Not even a little bit. What's shaking bacon? My name's Bruno Panucci. I hope you're doing well. So I've been doing this carnivore diet consistently for over a year and a half, inconsistently for about 6 or 7 years before that. And I had a rough time getting off sugar and carbohydrates. It was pretty good for the first year. I was very strict, not a lick, taste, or bite. Then I convinced myself I think I could handle some sugary foods. And I slipped off a very slippery slope and ended up having a rough time for years afterwards for a variety of reasons, getting back on track with the carnivore diet. It took me till 2020 before I finally got back on track 100%. Now, I haven't had a lick, taste, or bite of any food that I'm not allowed to have because I have a sugar and carbohydrate addiction. I can't manage it. I can't have a portion-controlled size of cake or ice cream or any variety of foods high in carbohydrates or even low in carbohydrates because it stimulates the cravings to have more. Yes, that can be a bit of a bummer to some people out there thinking, I could never do that. Good for you. If that works for you, great, but I could never do that. Well, I think what that means is you haven't had the right incentives. I've had a lot of health problems that I've corrected through the years, and some of those health problems were deadly serious. They weren't just lingering in the background. So what happens is you get to a point with your health, and everyone's got a different line in the sand, where they finally have to start making choices, and they have to start making difficult choices, maybe giving up that glass of wine at the end of each day or beer or certain foods to feel better. And lots of people don't even want to consider it. I talk to clients about this all the time. I'm a massage therapist, so I get lots of one-on-one time with people. And this conversation comes up every now and then. And the reality is most people do not want to make that change, and they'd rather live with the pain. I'm typically planting a seed when I talk about this with most people because most people don't realize that they can get rid of their joint pain or back pain or whatever the problem is quite often just from getting rid of inflammation in the body. And you can do that through getting rid of carbohydrates and sugar. So that includes fruits, nuts, vegetables, all sorts of carbohydrates, all sorts of breads and you name it. Carbohydrate is a carbohydrate. It all converts to sugar in the body, and it's not good for you if you get to that point in life where your body stops using it as fuel in a good way. Sometimes your body just doesn't handle it well the older we get. Actually, it's quite often. So what we have to do is accept the fact that we can't process food the way we used to. So I had a rough time accepting that fact, and I tried negotiating with that for a long time. I tried convincing myself I could still manage little bits of it here or there throughout the day or the week, a little bit at the end of the day, sometimes at the beginning of the day, and be good for the rest of the day. And the reality is I give in to cravings like a smoker does with a cigarette. That's the best way to compare it. And the problem with that also is I can't stop. I go into a binge with it. So I have to stop that to feel good. So do I miss certain foods more than others? It was really interesting because back when I was struggling with these cravings, my go-to foods were pizza, ice cream, cake, M&Ms sometimes, just the odd time I'd go through like candy bars or chips. But for the most part, it was pizza, ice cream, and cake. Those were the things I was always cheating with. And there was a while there after I put my dog down, that's all I had for months. I'm not exaggerating. I had probably 98 to 99% of my diet was pizza, ice cream, and cake. I made meals out of all those things daily, and that's not a good way to live. When those foods are in front of me now, I don't crave them at all. Not one bit. They could be right in front of me, homemade pizza, store-bought pizza, doesn't matter. I can sit in front of it. Even the smell of it doesn't do anything for me. Yeah, it smells nice. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but it doesn't trigger any cravings. And the freedom that comes from not having any cravings, it's well worth the trade-off of getting rid of those foods. Now, alcohol. Alcohol is something I never really struggled with, ever. So lots of my friends, by the time they were teenagers, in their late teens, they were always having a lot of alcohol, something that it just didn't faze me. My dad and my mom, when I was a kid, they were very open with giving us alcohol at a very young age, literally infants, and little babies want to go and have a little sip of whatever mommy or daddy you're drinking, and you could always have a little sip of beer. And what their goal was to not make alcohol a novelty for us. And it worked. All 4 of us children, my 3 siblings and I, we're adults now. None of us ever struggled with alcohol. It was never something that was an issue for any of us because we knew we could have it whenever we wanted. By the time we were teenagers, 13, 14, 15, my dad would let us have alcohol. And it helped prevent that novelty factor that happens by the time you're, anywhere. Often I've seen kids drinking by the time they're 12 years old. up to often 17 or 18, where it's just something you want to do. It's the weekend, let's go drink. And when you're that age, drinking means getting drunk. I just didn't enjoy the idea of numbing myself. So I never really started drinking really till my mid 30s. And I really enjoy alcohol. I like good craft beers, but I don't miss them because those beers are full of carbohydrates. There's some alcohols, most hard liquors are lower in carbohydrates, and some are carbohydrate free. And the odd time I might have a vodka and soda water if I'm out on a date or something like that. But for the most part, I could live happily without alcohol the rest of my life. Now, what about sweets? Anything from potato chips to cake and ice cream. Those were my worst problems. Yeah, I had a problem with pizza and carbohydrates and bread, but ice cream was by far my worst trigger. That's the one thing I would make a meal out of, and I had a big appetite. So we're talking a lot of ice cream. And I can honestly say nowadays, it doesn't do a thing for me. I see it, it doesn't do anything. I have no desire to have any sugary foods anymore. I don't crave it when I see it. I don't crave it when I smell it. I don't crave it when I see commercials for it. I don't crave it at all. You get to a point where it just goes away. But what about sugary drinks? Now, fortunately, since I was in college, since my early mid-20s, I mainly started drinking water. So that's something I tried dealing with outside of a zero carb or carnivore diet because I used to live off diet pop. I loved diet pop. When I was a teenager, we had pop whenever we wanted and we had a lot of it. So it was a big thing for me. I would have 6 to 8 cans of Coke in a day easily. And when I used to work nights as a bouncer, the bars are really hot. So I'd always get pop all night long. I'd be drinking pop all night long just to keep me cool. So it was something I was having on a regular basis. I don't drink coffee. I would have pop for breakfast. Other people had coffee in the mornings or tea, usually coffee. And they'd be like, what are you doing having pop in the morning? And I was like, what are you doing having coffee in the morning? What's the difference, right? Neither are good for you. I know it's weird, but for me, it wasn't a big deal to have something like that in the morning. I would have it at my factory job that I used to have years ago, and I would have it in the morning and then each break after that. And then on a hot day, I always had more. But that can be a thing for lots of people because it's still sometimes zero carb. So the problem with that is it keeps the sugar cravings alive. Even though it's zero carb, it's still high in artificial sweeteners. It triggers the dopamine receptors in your brain and your body starts craving sugar even though you haven't had any sugar. The one thing that doctor let me have when I was doing that zero carb way of eating was we were allowed to have as much, I think it was Trident gum, as we wanted, as long as it didn't have a candy shell, as long as it was sugar free. So it had to be the little sticks. But the problem with that was I was having at least a pack a day because I was still craving that sweet flavor. I wasn't craving ice cream and all these junk foods anymore, but I still was getting my fix in a different way. So it's tough to stop that. I was doing that through the winter of 2013 and 14. Even when I stopped that way of eating, I still had that gum on and off for years. I probably didn't stop having it till 2019 because I realized it was keeping those sugar cravings alive and it was making it a more uphill battle. So why don't I miss any of those things? Well, most importantly, it's because I don't have any sugar substitutes. I'm 100% strict with this carnivore way of eating. I accepted the fact a while ago that I'm an abstainer, not a moderator. I have friends that are carnivores and they're moderators. Every now and then they can treat themselves to something and it's fine. It doesn't faze them. They go right back to doing carnivore the next day. Doesn't even bother them. Me, if I did that, I would crave it. I remember Alice Cooper saying once in an interview, and he'd been dry for many years, and the record company gave him a celebration for, I think, being with them for 10 years. Him and his wife had a toast with everyone else around them, and they both had champagne in their glasses. He said in this interview, to this day, I don't know why my wife didn't stop me. He said he had that drink of champagne, and he'd been sober for quite a few years by this point. And then by the end of that night, he had 3 bottles hidden in the house. Now, I never hid any food from anyone, but I had that same frame of mind. If I had a little bit of ice cream, say at someone's house, and it was a small portion size of ice cream, that wasn't enough to satisfy me. On my way home, I had to stop and get more ice cream until I was satisfied with that. And it was usually a large amount of ice cream. I'm talking like 3 containers of like Ben & Jerry's or Haagen-Dazs. That's a lot of ice cream. To get rid of those cravings, you often have to go 100%. With this way of eating. And it takes, a few weeks before the intense cravings go away. After 2 weeks, usually the intense cravings are gone. And then after about another 2 weeks, it's sort of manageable, but you don't want to kind of go to someone's house or a restaurant because you might give in. I found for me, it takes up to 3 months before I sort of get bulletproof. Now, that's not an uncommon number for people. Usually around the 3-month mark, they tend to get to the point where they don't have to deal with the cravings anymore. So I found that's my magic number. You might be a little bit different. It might take a little longer. It might be a little less for you. But what I went through that first time is the problem other people deal with is you, after a while, convince yourself into thinking, I think I can have that one little bite. It won't bother me. And that's when you're going to find out how bad your sugar craving was, because you might go back, and why risk it? So not a lick, taste, or bite for the rest of my lifetime. So for me, I'm not having a lick, taste, or bite for the rest of my lifetime. It's just not worth it for me. I've already been there and I've tried that. I know I have to abstain. So why do I do it? It's because I feel so good without that food. That food limits my day-to-day life and quality of life. And they're also not good for my blood work. Whenever I go to a doctor, I don't do well on my tests when I have carbohydrates in my diet. All my numbers are off. My HDL's off, my blood pressure's off, everything's off. My heart rate's off, my blood sugars are high, my A1C's not good. It's just not worth it. My quality of life is better because now I can exercise easier without any joint pain. So my quality of life and day-to-day living is easier. I can run up a flight of stairs, take a few breaths, and I'm fine. I'm not out of breath. It's a really nice feeling. That's the way you're supposed to feel, even into your 50s. I'm almost 50 years old, and I don't have that problem anymore. So it comes down to an increase of quality of life along with the weight loss. The weight loss comes as a side effect of getting rid of all this inflammation in your body. You get rid of the inflammation by getting rid of the carbohydrates and sugar. It doesn't often work for people that well when they only go 95% or 98% with this. Most people have to go 100% to get these awesome results and to feel as good as they do. That's why people who do keto notice a big difference when they switch over to carnivore, because keto is almost there. Carnivore gets you all the way there. So how do I feel about those foods when I see them? It doesn't faze me, to be honest. The only thing that might faze me on a scale of 1 to 10 would be a Caesar salad. Sometimes out of all those foods that I was addicted to, Caesar salad was not one of them. When I smell it on the table at my parents' house, yeah, it does smell good. And I'm like, you know what, that smells really good. But I actually don't crave it, but I have to admit it smells really good. I actually like the smell of that more than pizza or any of the other foods I was addicted to. That love affair is done. That love affair, breaking up with carbohydrates and sugars, kind of like breaking up with an ex that just wasn't good for you. And the longer you dated them, the more you lost yourself. And the longer you dated them, it turned out that you found out, they were turning you into a person that wasn't really you. And it's not necessarily their fault. That's your fault because you let that happen. But don't be too hard on yourself because you're dealing with addiction. Sometimes we're addicted to things that aren't good for us. And it's time to make a change. I made my change. I hope you dealt with your change rather well. If you're still dealing with your change, if you're still going through your change and you're on and off of this carnivore way of eating, perhaps it's worthwhile to just say, you know what? Draw your line in the sand. When are you going to draw your line in the sand? The freedom you have in your life afterwards, even people who don't struggle with weight or health problems, some people just do it because they want to optimize their health and they want to feel good all the time. And they noticed as they were getting older, they just weren't feeling as good as they used to. And a carnivore diet just helped their day-to-day quality of life. So it's not always about weight loss, and it's not always about dealing with joint problems or pathologies that people have the older we get and the more inflamed their bodies get. Some people just notice it helps their performance in their athletics. So it's something for kind of everyone out there. If you don't fall into one of those categories, you're typically in one of the other categories. So anyway, I hope you're doing well. I hope you found this video insightful, and I hope you give this video a thumbs up if you like it. Thanks and take care.